9 picking up the pieces. Lucian Alliance, Homeworld Hall of the Council, Day 61, 1107. It had been weeks since Outpost 7 had been destroyed. Gerhardt Zinnar had spent those weeks dealing with major unrest within the Alliance. There had been several battles between Hostel's factions, along with 24 assassinations. There had also been 3 rebellions by locals whom wanted the Alliance off their planets. It had taken major muscle flexing to get everybody back in line. In fact, one of the rebel planets had actually been lost to the Alliance. But that was actually working in Zinnar's favor. He could use losing the planet and all the unrest as an excuse to delay the attack on Earth. No, 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 he was yelling at several commanders who were gathered in the hall. I want 3 motherships in orbit of Outpost 7 until the examination of the wreckage is done. We are not taking any chances. Is that clear? The commanders nodded that they understood. Now, get out, all of you. The commanders walked out, while Zinnar sat at a large table in the center of the room. Idiots. They wanted to go on the offensive against Earth, while they knew nothing about whoever had destroyed the base. For all they knew, destroying the outpost was just the beginning of whatever they had planned. He needed the analysis of the wreckage before he made his next move. If it was Earth, which I doubt, attacking them would be a serious mistake. And that meant that there was nothing to do but wait. So that was exactly what he would do. Beta Site Gate Room Day 65/29 October 2017, 0800. General Jack O'Neill was standing in the middle of a beehive of activity. People were moving boxes into the gate room, filing in paperwork, and talking amongst themselves. In the back of the room, several technicians were working on the circuits that controlled the gate. O'Neill had beamed down from the Odyssey 2 minutes ago. He was up to speed with the reports, but had wanted to see the progress firsthand. The base commander, Lieutenant Colonel Gabriel Sobel, walked into the gate room. Sobel had first come to the SGC's attention when Atlantis had encountered an alternate universe version of the Daedalus. While Colonel John Shepard and his team had explored the ship, they had found a log entry recorded by an alternate version of Sobel. That version of Sobel had been the commander of the Daedalus. But the Gabriel Sobel of this universe had not been part of the Stargate program at this point. After Telford and Vale had both led their respective expedition teams away from the beta site, it had needed a new commander. And Sobel had all the right skills, so she had been recruited into the program. "General," Sobel began, "welcome to the beta site." "So, is this a sign that you are ready to go?" O'Neill said, while gesturing towards the people around them. "Yes, sir," Sobel began. "Reinforcement Unit 1 is ready to go, as is the Planet 19 site construction team." She paused. "We've also been making improvements to the power source. The final diagnostic is running now. It should finish in about an hour, sir." "So, how about a tour?" "Yes, sir," Sobel said. "Also, we've got a pool going on what the name of the Planet 19 outpost is going to be." "Really?" O'Neill said with a smirk. The two of them walked out of the gate room. O'Neill got a feeling that this was going to be an interesting tour. Beta Site Gate Room Day 65/29 October 2017, 0915. Major Frank Levine looked at the Stargate and took a deep breath. He had served on Atlantis for several years, where he had flown puddle jumpers. Then, several weeks ago, he had been transferred to the beta site to lead Reinforcement Unit 1. And now, the time to leave had come. The diagnostic had finished, and the override program had been loaded. Colonel Sobel gave the order to begin the dialing sequence. "If you had told me that I would be assigned to fly a spaceship several billion light-years from home, I would have called you crazy." And even weirder, he would be working for a colonel who had previously worked for Roman Empire. On the other hand, Colonel Shepard would say that it's just another day in outer space. He had barely completed the thought when the 9th chevron locked and the wormhole opened. "Here we go," Levine said. He took a deep breath and stepped through the puddle. His team followed, and 7 seconds later, the wormhole disengaged. Over in the control room, General O'Neill had watched them go. He turned to Sobel. "So, how long before we can send the construction team?" 2 hours, sir. The power source needs to cool down, otherwise we risk blowing up the base. "Yeah, that would be bad," O'Neill said. "So, what exactly will they be building?" Sobel turned to a large monitor that was mounted on a nearby wall. There was a keyboard underneath, which she used to enter several commands. The monitor changed to show a blueprint of the planned outposts. There was a ground level made out of Quonset huts and tents. The tents were deployable rapid assembly shelters. Drashs were special military tents that came with air conditioning and electrical power. Underneath, each structure was a fallout shelter. These would be connected by a corridor to form a second level. The base would have a staff of 60, plus 3 SG teams of 4 people each. The blueprint was labeled Planet 19 Outpost. "The outpost really needs a better name," O'Neill said. The look on Sobel's face made it clear that she agreed with him. Spira Bridge Day 65/29 October 2017, 1030. The first thing Frank Levine had done was settle into his tiny quarters. After that, Major Teldy had given the new arrivals a tour of the ship, and now he was walking into his new place of work. "Tilda well, when I'm not out flying puddle jumpers. Tilda, to fly a jumper, you need the ancient gene." Alas, that gene that only occurred in humans, and it was pretty rare. "Tilda, so we figured out how to give people the gene artificially. Tilda, but that method only worked on humans. This meant that only the humans could fly the 2 jumpers they had." The reason he was thinking about all of this was Sergeant Tizalo. The Ursini had been the chief pilot until his arrival. He wanted to treat Tizalo like just one of the crew, but the fact that he could not fly the puddle jumpers was not helping with that. Tilda, counting Tizalo and Alex Patterson, there are 8 pilots now. Tilda, and only one of those was not human. He reached the helm console. "Sir," Tizalo said. "Sarge," Levine said, "how is our girl doing?" "Sailing smoothly, sir. No alarms, no problems, and we are not due to drop out of FTL for another 2 hours, sir." "Excellent," Levine paused. "Look, I know this whole thing is awkward, but I just want you to know that I think you did a terrific job as chief pilot, so carry on." "Yes, sir." Levine walked out of the bridge, confident that Spira was in good hands. Lucian Alliance, Homeworld Hall of the Council, Day 75, 0800. The analysis of the wreckage was finally done, and that meant that Zinnar had run out of time. The Alliance was a powder keg ready to burst, and it was aimed at Earth. "Tilda, this is not going to end well." Tilda, Earth had finished their repairs on the Sun Tzu, and the George Hammond had returned home. Together with the Odyssey, this meant that the planet was defended by 3 warships. But the real defenses of Earth were its friends. The Tory had spent the last couple of years rebuilding their ties with the Free Jaffa and Takra. The Tory Alliance, as it was unofficially being called, had fallen apart during the last years of the Goa'uld Empire. And the war with the Ori had damaged the relationships even further. But that had been years ago, and things had changed a lot since then. If the Alliance attacked Earth, they would destroy all life on the planet. And then the Free Jaffa and Takra would avenge the loss by launching a full-scale attack against the Lucian Alliance. The Alliance would end up fighting a war it would probably not win. And even if it did win, the Alliance would be badly damaged. "Tilda, but if I don't attack, they will kill me and then start a new civil war." Tilda, and both scenarios would end with the Alliance in flames. "Tilda, doomed if you do, doomed if you don't." Tilda, the fleet was holding position, waiting for the final order. He stood up from the meeting table he had been sitting at and walked across the room. There was a transmission console there, which he activated. The console showed a map with the fleet and Earth's solar system. He hit the proper buttons and opened a channel to all the ships. He gave the order to attack and watched as the ships began to move. 10. The Alliance attacks Earth. George Hammond, Bridge Day 75, 0807. Sam Carter watched as the Lucian Alliance fleet approached. There were 8 7 Haddock-class motherships and 11 Cheops-class warships. There were also hundreds of Al-Kesh bombers, many armed Teltac cargo ships and lots of death gliders. All Earth had was 3 BC 304-class ships. The Apollo and Daedalus were not here. Homeworld Command had learned about the attack yesterday, but the 2 ships were 3 weeks away from Earth. 2 minutes to weapons range, ma'am, Kevin Marks said. Shields at full strength, Dave Kleinman said. Odyssey and Sun Tzu are in position, ma'am. F-302s, Carter asked. All fighters have been deployed, Marks said. Each BC-304 carried 16 F-302s, and the squadrons from Earth are approaching. Earth had was home to 4 squadrons of F-302s, each 16 fighters strong, so in total, there were 112 fighters against thousands of death gliders. They will enter weapons range in 30 seconds. 1 minute until the fleet enters weapons range. The Alliance fleet entered weapons range. All 3 Tory ships bobbed and weaved, doing their best to avoid the rain of incoming weapons fire. At the same time, they fired everything they had, destroying as much targets as they could. The F-302s soon joined in, hitting all the dozens of death gliders with missiles. But it was not enough. There were simply too many enemy ships. Shields down to 60%, Marks yelled. Maintain fire, Carter ordered. Carter knew that her crew was doing the best they could, but she also knew that it would not enough. Tilda, come on, Jack. Time to test the .7. Tilda, back in 2004, SG-1 had found an ancient outpost in Antarctica. Besides leading Earth to Atlantis, that outpost had also been home to ancient weapons, simply known as drones. Those drones were controlled by special chair that very unoriginal was called a control chair. Then, in 2009, the control chair had been destroyed by an enemy called the Wraith. It had rendered Earth's supply of drones useless. But after finding out about the pending attack, Earth had pressed the Mark 0.7 into service. After the Lucian Alliance attack of 2010, Stargate Command and the Atlantis expedition had begun trying to build their own version of the control chair. The 2010 version had been called the Mark 0.1 or .1. The .7 was the latest attempt. The problem was that even if it worked, Earth's supply of drones was not that big. Shields are dropping fast, Kleinman said. We need. That was as far as he got before several yellow lights flashed by outside the window. Tilda drones. Tilda, the lights hit a nearby Al-Kesh, which exploded. More lights followed and more ships exploded. It was enough to give the George Hammond a breather, and Marks used the relief to hit the nearest ship with everything the ship could muster. It exploded under the barrage. Shields are down to 11%, Kleinman said. The hull is taking heavy damage. Several of the ships have entered weapons range of Earth. They're about to open fire, ma'am. Ma'am, Marks began. We have more incoming, they're about to. The new ships were the same designs as the Alliance fleet. But instead of shooting at the Tory ships, they attacked the Alliance vessels. Kleinman's console beeped. Carter could see the main display of his station and realized that the newcomers had just transmitted friend of foe signals. Their ID codes identified them as Free Jaffa vessels. Stargate Command had asked both the Free Jaffa and the Tok'ra for help. Both had promised to send every ship they had in range, and both had. Because the Free Jaffa vessel had barely been eyed when a small fleet of Tok'ra ships appeared and also joined the fray. Alas, it was at this point that the drones stopped coming. Tilda, the drones ran out. Tilda. Shields are down, Mark said. Evasive maneuvers. Keep firing. This was the end of the line, and they all knew it. George Hammond was surrounded by enemy ships and taking heavy damage. Odyssey and Sun Tzu were in the same situation, and all three ships were giving as good as they had got. The friendly ships and remaining F-302s were fighting for all they were worth, trying to break through. Tilda, goodbye, Tilda. She was about to order a ramming course at the nearest ship when a nearby area of space lit up with the light of a spaceship dropping out of hyperspace. 2 seconds later, another ship followed. Carter looked at Kleinman's console and frowned. Tilda, Apollo, and Daedalus? That's impossible. Tilda, yet, somehow, the two ships were here. They opened fire and launched their F-302s. Before Carter could respond to the development, several areas of the space around the battle wrinkled. When the effect was over, 6 satellites were hovering just outside the war zone. They cut loose with blue beam weapons. The satellites made quick work of the Lucian Alliance fleet. Then they went dormant. Tilda Carter got to her feet and made her way to a nearby console. She ran a scan of the satellites and frowned. The device appeared to be ancient in origin, which was impossible. Unless, something has changed, something big. Lucian Alliance Homeworld Hall of the Council, Day 75, 0930. Gerhard Zinnar couldn't believe what he had just seen. The whole attack fleet had been wiped out. One moment they had been on the edge of victory, but then things had turned against them. Those satellites looked ancient, but that is impossible. The ancients were extinct. But, it would explain what happened to Outpost 7. But it seemed totally out of character for the species. They had fought wars, but never began them. And Alliance intelligence was not helping them either. The Tory had very effectively clamped down on security. For the past 3 years, there was zero information on Earth's attempts to dial the 9th chevron. If they had somehow managed to contact a group of unknown ancients thanks to destiny, intelligence had no proof of it. Something is about to come knocking on our door. Time to start preparing. He activated the communications console and began giving orders. Planet 1 New Asuran Senate Chamber Day, 59, of the Spira Expedition. 0800. Galaxies away and days earlier, Yorick first of the New Asurans walked into the Senate chamber. His people were in control of 18 planets in what they called the Hope Galaxy. Besides their own worlds, there was also Planet 19. This was the new home of the Nakai colonists and the Ursini survivors. It was also where Earth was planning to build an outpost, but change was in the air. After learning about the Berserker drones and that they were headed for the Nakai home galaxy. Well, the New Asuran Senate had debated their current stance on other species, and it had been heated. That had been 28 days ago, and things had been tense in the Senate ever since. Said Senate had 18 members, 1 for each planet. After the debate, they had voted on ending the isolation of the New Asurans. There had been 11 votes against and 7 in favor, but the debate had resumed after that vote. May I? There were nods, and the 2 senators sat down. The Senate chamber had been one of the first buildings to go up on Planet 1, so it was a simple brick building lit by candles and oil lamps. It was heated by a fire underneath the floor. He took his shoes off and moved to the center of the room. Here we go, Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, it has been weeks since the arrival of the Nova Roma in our galaxy. The ship had ambushed by the Nakai and so badly damaged that it had needed to be scuttled. And the birth of civilization on Planet 19. But now we are approaching another major junction in our history. Tomorrow, the command ships will reach the Nakai home galaxy. He paused. So we have a decision to make. Will we continue to isolate ourselves, or will we choose a new destiny? When we arrived here, thousands of years ago, we went into isolation. We did so to bolster our numbers so that, one day, we could have numbers to defend ourselves from Oberoth and our brethren. And perhaps the ancients. He leaned on the table that the senators were sitting at. We no longer have that excuse to hide behind, our brethren and gone and the ancients, he snorted. The ancients don't care. They feel interacting with us is beneath them. Are we like that? Are we that arrogant? The time of isolation is over, he paused. In 6 days, I am leaving for the Milky Way galaxy, and I will dedicate myself to making it better. The question is, how many of you will come with me? And with that said, he walked out of the Senate chamber. The moment the doors closed behind him, the senators erupted into heated arguing again. They would no doubt considering not telling the general population, but Yorick had planned ahead. He reached into a pocket of his suit and took out the transmitted he had carried into the meeting. Tilda transmitted every word. Tilda, in the end, it wouldn't matter what the Senate would what. The people would decide. George Hammond, Bridge Day 95, 1211. It had been 20 days since the attack on Earth. The repairs to George Hammond had been completed 2 hours ago. Odyssey and Sun Tzu had been relaunched yesterday, and now all 3 ships were on a shakedown cruise together. As for the Apollo and Daedalus, they had been sent on a mission. After the battle, the satellites had turned and begun flying away from Earth at sublight speeds. The 2 ships had followed them, while running more scans. Alas, as soon as they had passed Mars, the satellites had self-destructed. The 2 ships had then gone looking for clues for where they had come from. The formation had flown to the debris field near Mars and was now running scans on what little was left. Sam Carter was standing at one of the bridge consoles and checking the readings. As she did, she thought back to the debriefing of Colonel Caldwell and Colonel Ellis. Apollo and Daedalus had been headed for Earth at maximum speed. Then, an alien sphere had appeared above each ship. They had emitted a particle field, which had boosted the speed of the vessels. But that really confused her, was that just before they had arrived at Earth, the 2 spheres had flown away and self-destructed. Tilda, somebody really doesn't want to leave anything behind. Tilda, but interesting thing was that the energy signatures of those spheres were also ancient. Tilda, or Asuran. Tilda, the first time that option had been brought up had been mere minutes after the attack. But there was no way to tell ancient and Asuran technology apart. And there had not been a peep from the new Asurans since the news of the command ships had come through. She was about to start a new scan when her console beeped. An Aurora-class battleship had just dropped out of hyperspace. Carter ran a scan of the vessel. The computer identified it as the Tria. Next, the computer spit out that there were 5 people on board, and all 5 were Asuran. Then the Tria sent out a transmission. Tria, Bridge Day 95, 1215. As Yorick had expected, the Senate had indeed tried to hide his ultimatum. And the people had heard the transmission, leading to them threatening to launch an all-out rebellion. So the Senate had yielded. Ever since they had met the Tory, Yorick had been studying the recent history of the Milky Way galaxy. And that was when he had learned about the Protected Planets Treaty. The Asgard had formerly protected 27 worlds from the Goa'uld. Eventually, the Asgard had gone extinct, and the Goa'uld Empire had collapsed. As for what had happened to the planets after treaty had been dissolved, only 2 of them, Earth and Galar, had advanced technology to defend themselves, and the Lucian Alliance had taken over the 24's others. The only planet that they had not taken was known as BP 6-3Q1, or Esphorian. This was because the planet was infested by giant bugs that infected people and rewrote their DNA. They had wiped out the locals. 2 days after his ultimatum, the dust had settled, and Senate had asked him what his plan was. It has at this time that he had told them about the treaty. Yorick had announced that he intended to end the war between the Tory and the Lucian Alliance. And he intended to do so by reinstating the Protected Planets Treaty. The next 9 days had been spent preparing the people and ships for travel. There had, however, been one major concern: the people on Planet 19. Some believed that while going to the Milky Way was the right thing to do, they could not abandon their allies in the Hope Galaxy. And so, Yorick and the Senate had given them permission to stay behind. Of the 27 billion new Asurans, 21 million had chosen to do so. They had joined the Nakai and Orsini on Planet 19, which they had renamed Hope Prime. And on day 70 of the Spira expedition, the rest of the new Assurans had left the Hope Galaxy for the Milky Way. The trip had taken Nova Roma several weeks, and ancient Aurora-class ships were slower than the costume-build vessel. But the new Assurans had spent their time in the new Hope Galaxy well. Their Aurora-class ships were faster than the ancient versions, and for this trip, their hyperdrives had been boosted by the installation of zero-point modules. The whole trip would take 15 days. While the ships would carry several thousands, the rest would make the trip by Stargate. Ironically, the first planet they had settled on was the one the Alliance had rejected, BP-6-3Q1. Because new Assurans lacked DNA, they were immune to the bugs, and they had made quick work of them. It had been the first of 18 worlds to be settled, but not the last. And the new Assurans had been smart about it. They had picked planets that nobody cared about, and so nobody in the Milky Way galaxy had known about their arrival. But when the DSI facility on Hope Prime had received intelligence on the pending attack on Earth, they had decided to act. So they had seen to it that the Apollo and Daedalus would reach Earth in time. Next, they had deployed 6 weapon platforms to aid in the defense of the planet. When the fleet had arrived 10 days ago, the new Assurans had been ready to go the next phase. They had scouted the 24 protected planets, and now they were ready to make themselves known. Tilda, here we go. Tilda Yorick activated the transceiver and began speaking. 11 Ashes. A7X811, Ice Plane Day 102, 2103. NR1 was walking across the nastiest, coldest plane GL had ever seen. Before he had joined NR1, that would not have meant much. But since then, he had been to plenty of alien worlds. The team had been on few missions before Major Levine and his team had arrived. After, things had kicked into high gear. The team had gone on dozens of missions, looking for resources and pieces of the archaeological puzzle that Dr. Aronov was trying to put together. So, remind me why we're walking again, GL said. Because NR2 and NR5 are using the 2 puddle jumpers we have. Alex Patterson said. NR2 was studying a ruin on E5S157, one of 4 other planets in range of Spira. And NR5 was on E4R225, where they were looking for edible plants. As for NR1, they had been sending back chunks of ice. That ice was being turned into drinking water right now. Allison Porter was currently running a special scanner on the ice plane. She made sure that the water was not contaminated with anything. That's it for this chunk, Porter said. The rest of the ice is loaded with contaminations. Time to move on, Vale said. GL pulled the collar of his coat up as high as it would go. The Tory winter gear was good, but Nakai were not a fan of the cold. Colonel Vale took the lead as they walked further away from the gate. Tilda, I wish NR3 and 4 were here to back us up. Tilda, but the 2 security teams were on E4Z301. It was a harsh world with a nasty atmosphere. The reason they had gone there anyway was because it was a place where they could get some of the things needed to make gunpowder and bullets. Anything? Vale asked. All of this is ice contaminated, Porter said. How much water do we have? Several hundred liters, boss. Nowhere near enough for the long term, sir. Vale nodded, and they kept going. As they did so, GL wondered how far they were into this galaxy. It had been 65 days since they had arrived. Tilda and a Tory year is 365 Spira days. Tilda, which meant that if the Spira AI had told the truth, they had 300 days ahead, just to cross this galaxy. It had taken time for him to get used to Earth days, but now he was. Thinking of Earth, his mind drifted to the developments that had taken place halfway across the universe. As they had announced, the new Assurans had set about restoring the Protected Planets Treaty. The Lucian Alliance had fought back, but to no avail. They had lost all 24 planets, along with many ships and personnel. And the whole Assuran campaign had lasted only 4 days, which made it even more of a blow to the Alliance. After the campaign had ended, they had launched a 2-day counterattack. Said attack had ended in even more losses for the Lucian Alliance. So, this morning, they had signed the Protected Planet Treaty. And then, they had been forced to retreat from countless worlds. Between the losses at Earth and in the campaign, the Alliance had been decimated so badly that they didn't have enough people to secure all their worlds. The Alliance had been reduced to Lucia and 7 other solar systems. As for dialing the 9th chevron, the Alliance had its hands full simply surviving. They were no longer a factor. Tilda and now wait for the other shoe, Tilda because Ji Yao's instinct was telling him that this was too easy. Alas, only time would tell. Lucian Alliance, Homeworld Hall of the Council Day 105, 0817. The Hall of the Council was no longer the Hall of the Council. Gerhard Zinnar had perished in the campaign, as had all the commanders. And the new leaders whom had become leaders by simply surviving this whole mess had decided to turn the hall into a hospital. The job of running this place had fallen to Yaro's Hinak. Hinak was a healer in his 40s, with graying hair, Caucasian skin, and brown eyes. He was working on a man with serious burns when the doors opened, and Ingrid Morris walked in. Morris had been elected mayor of Lucia City, the capital of Lucia, or as most people called it, the Lucian Alliance homeworld. "Is the report on the Tory in?" Hinak asked. "Yes, and it will be the last report we will get on them," Morris began. "I've ordered all our spies back to Lucia. We need all the hands we can get." She paused. "And so far, nobody has had the guts or the brains to countermand my order." "Let's have a look," Hinak said as took the report. While the Tory had not attacked the Alliance, they had received aid from the new Asurans. Not only had they defended Earth from the Alliance, they had given them the Traya, an Aurora-class ancient warship. Worse, they had used their technology to complete the replacement for the Korolev, a warship they had lost to the Ori in only 7 days. And now, they were building another ship called the Prometheus, which was also a replacement for a ship lost to Ori. Tilda Apollo, Daedalus, George Hammond, Korolev, Odyssey, Prometheus, and Sun Tzu. That's 7 Tory warships, plus the Aurora-class Traya. Tilda, it was a formidable fleet, especially since the Alliance only had 5 Haddock-class ships left. Tilda and all those are needed to defend Lucia. Tilda, the rest of what was left of them were cargo ships, death gliders, and Okesh bombers. He sighed and gave the report back to Morris. The Lucian Alliance would be picking up the pieces for a long, long time. And as if the enlarged Tory fleet was not bad enough, there was also the matter of the Takra and Free Jaffa Nation. Together, the 2 species had launched a campaign to help the worlds the Alliance had abandoned recently. The goal of their campaign was to make it impossible for the Lucian Alliance to return to these planets. And from what Hinak had heard, they were being quite successful at that, which put the Alliance in even more hot water. "We'll be lucky to hold on to what little territory we have left," Hinak began. "Any other bad news?" "Well, there's this." She handed him another report, "and you're not going like it." The report was about Goa'uld activity. While the Goa'uld Empire had collapsed years ago, the Alliance still kept tabs on them. The Goa'uld were parasitic species that survived by taking over humans, suppressing the host's personality completely. And they were very evil creatures. After their empire had fallen, most of the Goa'uld had ended up poor and destitute. Others had ended up with just a handful of followers or guards, with the luckily ones ruling a single planet. And the rest had ended up working for the Lucian Alliance. But now the Goa'uld working for the Alliance and had not been killed in the collapse had begun to vanish, and so were many of the poor destitute Goa'uld. So far, the ones with followers seemed to be unaffected. But that might not last. Tilda great, that's the last thing we need. Somebody trying to rebuild the Goa'uld Empire. Tilda, if this was true, things were about to even worse. Alas, only time would tell. Spira Mess Hall Day 105/8, December 2017. 1532. Things were currently quiet aboard the Spira. The collection missions had been successful, and the ship was now well stocked. Carl Grogan was sitting in the mess hall and eating what passed for lunch aboard the ship. The crew was hard at work getting the 2 hydroponics bays growing, but it would be a while before they had enough food. So they were eating dehydrated rations and food they had picked up along the way. Tilda takes like rubber, but it's all we have. Tilda, he washed the food down with a glass of water. As he did so, Major Frank Levine walked into the mess hall. "Major," Grogan said while standing up. "At ease, Captain." Grogan sat down while Levine gathered his meal and then sat at the table. "So, how are the security drills going?" "Good. We've managed to increase our score by 13 points," Grogan said. "I heard you had a close call on E4Z 307 yesterday." "Yes, one of the local volcanoes decided that it felt like erupting while we were gathering plant samples. NR5 and I barely got out of there before the ash cloud swallowed the Stargate. On the bright side, we got all the samples we needed before it happened." He paused. "So, you think anything will happen this shift?" "Well, we'll find out together. We're both on bridge duty." Grogan would man Tactical 1, while Levine would be at Flight Control 1. "Between you and me, I hoping for." That was as far as he got before the intercom came to life, and Major Teldy announced there was an incoming wormhole. Which Grogan knew was not good news, because the only team out off-world was NR2, and they were not supposed to come back until 1630. Levine and Grogan bolted from the mess hall, making their way to the gate room. When they got there, they found NR2 in rough shape. They were covered in dust, and Dr. Bennett was seeing to Jennifer Haley, who appeared to be injured. "Her leg is broken," Bennett began. "Captain Grogan, can you help me get her to the infirmary?" "Yes, doctor." Grogan and Bennett carried Haley out, while Levine turned to Alec Carlson. Carlson was examining the Malpee, which looked like it had taken a beating. "Tilda, this is not a good sign." Tilda NR2 had been on a mission to E6R103, and there had been signs that the planet had suffered some tremors recently. Tilda first volcanoes and now tremors. Tilda, if his suspicion was true, this area of space really didn't like them. "What happened?" "Turns out that the planet was less stable than we had hoped," Carlson said. "There was a major quake as we headed back to the gate." "Did you find anything?" "I guess you could say that," Carlson said. "There were no settlements on the surface, but we found a valley." Carlson worked the Malpee, which made an unhealthy grinding noise, but then began to move. There were dozens of houses carved into walls with wooden doors and furniture. "We found some writing, in the same language as F1Z008. We really need a better name for that race, other than the people of F1Z008. "Yes, we do," Carlson began, "but for now we have more important things to worry about." Levine nodded in agreement. So far, the ruins they had encountered had been far apart. But there had been ruins on E4Z307 and E5S157 as well, which had been relatively close to one another in galactic terms. Adding this discovery on E6R106 to the list, it painted a picture of a much more densely populated area. Tilda, a plain of ashes. Tilda, and they were going to have to cross it. 12 Patet X Sinner. Spira Gate Room Day, 128/31 December 2017. 0700. Today was the last day of 2017, and 2018 was promising to be quite the challenging year. It had been 23 days since they had crossed into the Plain of Ashes that the crew had begun calling it Pat. It was short for Patet X Sinner, which was Latin for Plain of Ashes. And that was exactly what they had found. Ruins of abandoned settlements, very little resources and signs of some kind of conflict, having destroyed some to these places. And as Vale stood in the gate room, he didn't expect F2B017 to be more hospitable than any of the other worlds they had visited recently. The dialing sequence finished, and the wormhole formed. As soon as it did, Jumper 1 took up position in front of the gate. The Mal-P data on the planet hadn't told them much about what they would encounter on the other side. This was because the Stargate on F2B-017 was at the bottom of a crater that the Mal-P couldn't leave. It had told them that there was gravity, a breathable atmosphere, and that the temperature was 27 degrees centigrade. Since they were going in with limited information and that they were still inside the PAT, Vale had assigned all 5 NR teams and both puddle jumpers to the mission. Major Levine would be flying Jumper 1, which would carry NR2, NR3, and NR5. Vale himself would fly Jumper 2, where NR1 and NR4 would be. As for Spira, Sergeant Tizalo would be in the center seat. They'll be fine. Jumper 1 made its way through the gate, while Vale made his way to Jumper 2. The 2 teams were ready to go, so Vale sat behind the controls and closed the rear hatch. "Here we go, people." He took the jumper into the gate room. Time to thread the needle. 2 seconds later, the jumper came out of the wormhole on the planet. Vale pulled the small ship out of the crater, where Jumper 1 was waiting for them. Woe, sons of Dis. As he saw the surface of the planet, he realized that his hunch to take all 5 NR teams had been correct. Because the planet was covered in modern city that stretched as far as he could see. And that city appeared to have been severely damaged by an attack from orbit. "It's like we flew into Coruscant," Grogan said. "Yeah, after the Separatists hit it with every ship they had," Vale said. Vale took the jumper further up. Next to him, Allison Porter was also studying the city. She realized that Vale and Grogan were right, and the ship had indeed been hit by a large number of vessels from orbit. But as she looked at the city, she noticed something odd. There were some undamaged chunks of city, and there was something else. The damaged parts of the city were expensive, fancy structures, or at least they looked like they had been, while the standing parts were slums. And then she saw something that made her frown. Is that. Lying amongst the ruins was what Porter believed to be one of the attackers. There was a trail behind the vessel, indicating that it had crashed. After it was shot down, Vale flew the jumper closer to the wreckage for a better look. As they approached, her suspicions were confirmed. The attacker was a command ship, and whoever had lived here once had shot it down. The ship was filled with ragged holes from weapons fire. "Bloody underworld," Ji Yao said. "Did anybody else notice that the slums are still standing?" Porter asked. "Yeah," Patterson said. "Why would the drones do that? I mean, it doesn't fit with what we've learned about them so far. They should have leveled the whole thing, not just certain areas." "She's right," Porter began. "They're not programmed to be that selective. Unless..." "Unless what?" Patterson asked. "Unless the programming wasn't making the selection," Ji Yao said. "What if, at this point, the builders were still in control? Maybe they were in control and choose not destroy the slums. That might also explain why we haven't found any of them before now." Porter gave him a look. "If they won the war with whoever lived here, they probably took all the Berserker drones and command ships with them when it was over. And if their home was in Galaxy Destiny too." "Sounds like we have a theory," Vale said. "Let's see if we can find out if it's true." Vale activated his radio and began giving orders. Then he started looking for a place to put down the puddle jumpers. So far, they had been gathering breadcrumbs of this puzzle. But this might be the motherlode, and he had no intention of missing any off it. He checked his watch and saw that they had only 4 hours before the ship jumped back into FTL, so this was going to have to be a rush job to boot. Well, just another day in outer space. Rect Command Ship Cockpit Day 128, 0712. Jennifer Haley landed on her feet. It had taken some searching, but they had found an airlock into the ship. It was at the top of the ship, so they had ended up falling into the internal space. Said space was a small cockpit. There were several control panels and 2 chairs. One of them had a skeleton in it, which Dr. Bennett was already studying. The other chair had been empty, but Alec Coulson was now using it as he studied the ship. "How is it looking, Alec?" "Dead as a doornail, boss," Coulson said. "We've got no power to any of the systems. I've tried rerouting, but to no avail." "What about our dead friend here, Doctor?" "He looks human, very human," Bennett began, "but the only way to know for sure is to take him back to Spira. The problem is that we cannot take him with along. These bones are so fragile that they will fall apart if we try to move them. I can, however, give you a guess." He looked at Haley. "These bones are roughly 50,000 years old." "Okay, do what you can, Doctor." Haley climbed back out of the ship. NR-5 was examining the outside of the wreck, which was overgrown by some kind of wooden vines. Hetty McConnell had cut through one of them and was studying the cross-section of the sample. McConnell looked up as Haley climbed down from the wreck. "Bennett found a skeleton, says it's 50,000 years old. What do the numbers on our green friends say?" "The numbers don't add up, because this vine has been growing for 200 years at most," McConnell said. "How can there be such a big discrepancy?" "I may have an answer," a male voice said. "And it's not good news, ma'am." McConnell and Haley turned to see Klaus standing next to the wreck. "The lower section is a mess, and there are several hull breaches down there, including one right next to what I think used to be the main reactor. And if the fuel leaked out, then maybe this whole area was dosed with some kind of radiation until 200 years ago," McConnell said. "Could be. And if it is, then every command shipwreck out there could be a radiation bomb waiting to blow up. Hence, the bad news part, I presume." "Yeah. And if Dr. Bennett is right, and these things are 50,000 years old, those bombs could be pretty fragile." Haley activated her radio and contacted Colonel Vale. She knew it was just a theory, but she was not going to take the chance that it was right. While NR-2 and NR-5 were examining the wreck, NR-3 and NR-4 had headed for the nearest slum. Finally, the job of looking for more crashed command ships had fallen to NR-1, which was she was contacting Vale. "F2B 017 wrecked office building day 128, 0727. Vale had listened to Haley's theory, and from the building he had climbed, he could see 7 more command ships' wrecks. The people of this planet had put up a considerable fight against the Berserker drones. Tilda and each of these ships might be a bomb. Great. Tilda, but if they wanted answers about the builders, they would have to risk a closer look at one of them. He picked one of the wrecks and reached for his radio. But before he could activate it, he got an incoming call. =/= Teldy to Vale. =/= Vale here. =/ sir, we've made a major discovery in the slums. =/ Teldy said. =/ I think you should come down here. =/ On our way. He made his way down to ground level, where Yal and Porter were working on gathering information. Patterson was standing guard as they did so. Vale told them to head out, which they did. The office building, or what they thought was an office building, was not far from the slums. So it took them only a few minutes to reach the 2 other teams. As they did, Vale realized that some things were universal. The place was built out of wood, corrugated steel, plastic, and repurposed garbage. Major Teldy was standing outside a large building made out of what Vale figured had once been shipping containers. Tilda people use whatever they can get their hands on. Tilda. "What do we have, Major?" "See for yourselves," Teldy said while gesturing towards the building. "They're inside." Vale made his way into the container building. The building appeared to be a makeshift medical clinic. Vale counted 8 beds, each with a body on them, and not a single one of them was human. Tilda, no way are those. Tilda, he looked at the bodies and realized that they were indeed what he thought they were. "Nakai," Yal said, "and Ursini, together on one planet, how is that possible?" He looked around the room and then noticed that two of the bodies were neither species. Approaching the bodies, he shook his head. And I've never seen one, but from what I learned in school, those. Jinako, Vale asked. Yes, Jiao said. Vale exchanged a look with Major Teldy. This planet was proving to be a game changer. Tilda before, we were working on a puzzle. Tilda, but now, they might soon end up play a game of cat-and-mouse with both the berserkers and whoever had lived on this planet. 13 Spira down. Spira Science Lab Day, 149/21 January 2018. 17:21. Nikita Aronov had just finished reorganizing the science lab. It had been 3 weeks since they had visited F2B017 and brought back a lot of pieces of the puzzle. In those weeks, he had managed to make some major progress in figuring out the history of 3 races and 2 galaxies. Today, he had been putting away the bits and pieces. Tilda, we need to find some storage space, or we'll run out of place to put things. Tilda, but for now, he had managed to scrape together enough space for the short term. So he sat behind his laptop and began writing his report. Alas, he was only 3 sentences in when Colonel Vale came in. He was followed by Alec Carlson. Nikita was about to greet them, but then he noticed that they were both wearing red armbands. The armbands were Sergeant Tzalo's idea and were used to identify people using the ancient communication stones. They also had the names of the person using the stones writing on them in erasable marker. Colonel Vale was currently exchanged with President Robert Mackenzie, while Alec Carlson was exchanged with General O'Neill. General, Mr. President, he said with a nod. So, O'Neill said, rumor has it that you have a report for us. Well, I need to put it on paper, but I can give you the cliff notes now, sir. He hit some keys, and a map appeared on his laptop. This is the Empire of Destroyers, which covers Galaxy Destiny 1 and Destiny 2. It needed a name, so I'm calling it the Predones Empire. Let me guess, Latin for Empire of Destroyers, Mackenzie asked. Yes. Anyway, the Predones Empire existed about 57,000 years ago, and it has a personnel problem. Think of it as the US during World War II. All the men are away fighting the war, so the ladies get into all sorts of jobs. Except in the case of the Empire, there aren't enough ladies to go around. So, what did the Empire do? Well, the Predones are pretty good with genetics, so they create 3 species to fill the holes. He hit some keys, and the map was replaced by a dictionary. Nakai means medic, which explains how they did what they did to Chloe Armstrong. Ursini is their word for scientist, and Jinako means engineer. Now, we fast forward 7,000 years and get to 50,000 years ago. Based on F2B017, Aka Predones Prime, that's when things went pear-shaped. The builders entered the picture. Yeah, and they had no intention of becoming slaves. But an empire this big, there's no way that they match its manpower, so they have no other option but to go down the automated path. Now, there are still plenty of details about the Builder Predones war missing, but I think we saw how it ended. After which, the builders pack up and go home to their own galaxy. So, what happened to them? That's the part we haven't figured out yet, Aronov said while making a face. And all of this is relevant, how? O'Neill asked. Well, we know that somebody has taken control of the control ship and drones. And based on what I've been able to puzzle together so far, the builders just jumped to the top of the suspect list. Especially if they are worried that the Nakai are trying to replace the Predones as the new big empire in this part of the universe. I'm sorry, but I don't buy it, Mackenzie said. I've been going over the reports on the blockade that forced Destiny's crew into stasis. The command ships blocked every Stargate, and every star Destiny could use to recharge. Now, I'm no expert on galaxies and Stargates, but that would take thousands of ships. Not a meager 200, and to fight a war across 2 galaxies, you'd need even more. There's that, O'Neill said. And why haven't they attacked yet? Those meager 200 ships have been sitting outside the Nakai home galaxy for months now, and nobody knows why. I'm telling you, we're missing a piece of the story. Mackenzie leaned on the table and looked at the laptop. And I've read enough SGC reports to know that it's always the missing piece that comes back to bit you in the ass. There were thousands of those ships in 2010, and now there are only 200. Where did the rest go? I don't know, Aronov said. Well, I think we should find out, O'Neill said. Before, you know. That was when the alarm sounded. Aronov bolted towards the bridge, with O'Neill and Mackenzie right behind him. They had just arrived when the ship dropped out of FTL. Nikita sat behind Science Station 2, which had been empty. He brought up the readings from the long-range sensors and gasped. Ahead of them was a major rift. He turned to President Mackenzie, but from the look on his face told him that he, the president, was no longer connected. And neither was General O'Neill. Guys, the connection has been severed, Vale said. What's going on? We're heading right for a massive rift, Colonel, Aronov began. There's no way to get away from it using sublight drives, because if I'm reading this right, it's a light you're across. And, as if that isn't bad enough, it's moving towards us. He hit some keys and a countdown appeared. We have 37 seconds before it reaches us. FTL drive. It's offline, Coulson said from Engineering 2. And even if it was working, I wouldn't recommend using it near that rift. We should divert everything we have to the shields, because I have a feeling that this might be a rough ride. Everything except the sublights, we might need them for the ride, Vale said, while making his way to the flight control consoles. One was manned by Frank Levine, while T-Zalo was behind the other. You can do this, boys. He activated the intercom. All hands, brace for impact. Repeat, brace for impact. 20 seconds to contact, Levine said. T-Zalo, take control of the thrusters. We're going to have to keep her from spinning out. I've got them, T-Zalo said. 10 seconds to contact. The lights on the bridge went out, as did some of the consoles. Nikita's console was one of them, but he didn't mind. Tilda Alex diverted the power. Tilda he could see the shields ripple as they received more power. Then the ship began to shake. He grabbed his console and counted down in his head. He reached 0, and then everything went dark. Stargate Command Briefing Room Day 150/22 January 2018, 1200. Robert Mackenzie plummeted into one of the chairs at the table and sighed. He had not gotten a lot of sleep since the connection with Spira had been severed. His advisors had told him to return to the White House, but he had refused. Tilda, there are over 100 people on that ship, and another 80 on Destiny. Tilda, and he had good people covering for him. Tilda, they'll call me if there's a real crisis. Tilda, so he had stayed at Stargate Command to deal with this situation. Damn, he said, what a mess. Mr. President, General Landry said as he walked into the room, you look horrible. I feel horrible, Mackenzie said. Have we found anything? No, the deep space internet feed from the Spira is dead, Landry said. And the ancient communications stones aren't connecting either. I'm afraid Spira is down. Mackenzie sighed. They would have to break the news to the families and friends of both crews, because without Spira, there was no hope for Destiny.